Welcome to the Strategic Treasurer Podcast, your source for interesting Treasury news in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of the Treasury Update Podcast by Strategic Treasurer, the largest pure-play Treasury consultancy in North America. The movement of functionality and services to the cloud has been underway for over a decade. This has created an opportunity for better services to become available to more companies. At the same time, the challenges that are raised need to be addressed. These include issues of data protection in all domains, and understanding security must extend beyond the internal data center. Let's listen in as Craig Jeffrey talks with Craig Calais about security.
This is Craig Jeffrey. Welcome to the Treasury Update Podcast. I'm glad you could join us. Security is a top concern when we think about security and the use of software as a service and how that's grown. There are concerns about how to extend the security of an organization. I was able to visit with Craig Calais, and we decided to discuss the topic of understanding the second chapter of the cloud. Now, Craig Calais is CEO of Source Calais, a consulting firm that's focused on data security, privacy, and value creation. He is a former CFO of Amazon.com's digital media and book businesses, as well as other companies, and was formerly an investment banker at Salomon Brothers. Before starting his firm, he was Chief Strategy Officer at SHI International. SHI International is one of the largest IT services companies in North America. Welcome to the podcast, Craig.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
The concept of discussing security and understanding the second chapter of the cloud, I think it makes sense to start with what do you mean when you say the second chapter of the cloud? Obviously, there's cloud adoption, it's growing, but you have a specific definition on that. Maybe you could describe what you mean by that.
Sure. It really was only a decade ago when these cloud services really came to life. Probably the best known at that time was Rackspace. And they were largely designed to help entrepreneurs start up companies on the web. And so we've come a long way in just a short period of time where now not just small startups, but the largest multinational companies in the world are using services like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft's Azure, Google's, and other infrastructure as a service platforms to run what used to be a data center. That's what I describe as the transition from the first chapter of the cloud to the second chapter that we're in now, which brings a whole host of issues that companies still have to resolve.
So to summarize, that first chapter is people putting an application on there for sales or something discrete, and now they're shifting in some cases, their entire data center out off premises, running on their hardware, someone else's software. Is that accurate?
Exactly.
What kind of concerns does that bring about? Obviously there are many benefits of software as a service. You don't have to dedicate all the resources to the hardware, the upkeep, the physical security, or maybe that's not the case. But what are the challenges that you see with this movement to the cloud, or how do you account for the change?
Well, just again to put it into perspective, I think anyone pretty much over the age of 40 remembers a world where everyone showed up to the office Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. All the computing was done in that chilly room with raised white floors and lots of blinking lights. And frankly, no one outside of IT really much knew what was going on in there. And so as you've seen workloads move rapidly, to these cloud-based services, we have to rethink the way we work. We have to rethink the way we protect our data. And for a lot of companies, they're really still trying to figure out just what their cloud infrastructure is going to be. I think that they still have to give a lot more thought to what the security and privacy implications are. In the broadest sense, you're shifting from a perimeter-based strategy, where you're building a wall around your data center to keep bad things out. And today we need to respect the fact that data now flows freely right over that wall out to the cloud, and that we need to take steps to protect that data as it flows across an organization and to the cloud.
So to play devil's advocate for a minute. If we look at the SSA 16 reports or SOC 1, SOC 2 reports that say someone is auditing that, someone's reviewing the security in these services, isn't that an ability to outsource some of it? And where is that true, and at what point does that not become true and it's still the responsibility of the organization?
Well, I would say I think that you can take false comfort in these kinds of SOC reports. I think, in fact, you put together a nice podcast that talks about some of the shortcomings of managing to compliance as opposed to managing for security. Even the large infrastructure as a service companies like Amazon and others will be very clear to consider security as a shared responsibility. And so you really can't expect your data to be fully protected simply because you've chosen to shift it over or outsource it to a third party. You have to take steps as well to protect that data.
You talked about the perimeter in the beginning. How do you protect the perimeter? You keep people out, but once they get in, there can be a problem. Is your concern once or if someone breaches the services that then the data is exposed?
Yeah, well, I think consider the different states of data. Data can sit at rest, either in your own data center or in data center controlled by a web service. Also in transit. So as it moves from your device, be it a mobile device or a desktop device or other kind of device, to that cloud provider, natural forms of protection that you would want to incorporate into your security strategy is to encrypt that data, both when it's to ensure that it's encrypted once it's at rest, but also when it's in transit. So that those aren't necessarily steps that the provider can do for you. That's a good example of why they would consider this a shared responsibility.
Right. The secure data or personally identifiable information or critical information could be on your servers, moving out to the third-party servers. You have to protect it at all states, stages, and movements. That makes sense. So has that made things easier or more complicated now that we've introduced something outside the internal firewalls to consider how we look at data?
Yeah, well, I think it's become a lot more complicated, and lots of companies, even large, seemingly sophisticated ones, are still trying to figure this out. The broad distinction I make is to consider, the applications that are in use in companies can fall into two categories: those that one would call sanctioned applications, and those that would be called unsanctioned applications. So the sanctioned applications are the ones that IT has been involved in. It's very much implementing them involves a group effort within a company, and so there's a lot of visibility on them. And examples would be Microsoft's Office 365, which is an alternative to the traditional licensed Office suite, for example. But other large sanctioned apps that you'll find in companies are Salesforce, Workday, Box, and others. And so those tend to have very high levels of security on their end. But again, you have to, as a company, have to take steps to protect that data as well. And we can get into that in more detail. But let me just introduce that concept of the sanctioned app versus the unsanctioned apps, which are literally the hundreds and sometimes thousands of apps that find their way onto a company's networks by virtue of an employee downloading the app, much like a 10-year-old might pull something down on their iPhone and use it. Almost always clicking through the end user license agreement by simply saying, I agree, without reading it. And there you have, an activity that people generally call shadow IT, where people are introducing, computing capability onto your network, almost always without seeking permission from someone like a CIO or a CISO. And even when frankly confronted, maybe not even seeking forgiveness, considering the significant security and privacy issues that are associated with many of these apps.
So the term shadow IT is interesting. That certainly seems a bit pejorative, and maybe coming from an IT perspective, it makes sense because it's outside, maybe not controlled. And I'm sure sometimes people are putting those in because they want responsiveness. Maybe not they're not getting the attention of IT, but however you refer to it, the shadow IT, introduces these points of vulnerability and access to data, to services, to the company's network that creates a problem. I don't know if you have examples of that or situations where this has caused a significant issue in companies.
Sure. Well, and shadow IT doesn't necessarily have to represent some untoward activity. I mean, let's face it, a lot of the apps that are out there are really cool, and they're very, they enable people to do some of their best work. If we thought that everyone could sort of rely on a generic Microsoft app to do everything, it would be a much less interesting world. And so, never underestimate an employee's ability to find and make use of some really innovative apps that are out there. But at the same time, there has to be some consideration to the risks that are born. I've seen a study that counted the number of apps that are circulating out there, something over 25,000, which only 6% are considered, quote, enterprise ready. And again, that's a very detailed discussion to define. But suffice to say that there are apps out there that are very safe, but many that are downright sketchy. One example, I think, of the kinds of apps that you might find out there, can include ones where you lose the ownership of the data itself. That when you upload all of your information, some people don't even give thought to whether or not they actually retain that ownership of the data, so they may not have the right to delete it, for example. So, and something that's sensitive can become very problematic quickly. That's why shadow IT is risky. Or creates risk. The traditional way of dealing with that has been the CIO to try to block access to known risky apps. But in today's world, it's just as easy for somebody who wants access to a certain app to find a way around that restriction. And sometimes they might go to an even riskier app if the one that they wanted has already made it onto some blacklist. It's a long way of saying we have to really rethink the way we work today to promote all the good things that the cloud brings, but be mindful and create actionable policies to ensure that the work we do using these apps is safe and promotes the agility and innovation that we all want.
That's interesting. That the level of care is very important, and it always seems like if someone's more careful than I am, they're paranoid. But we think about the level of care. Your example of data going different places. I travel a lot. I rent cars whenever one of the ride-shared services doesn't cover the right distance, and I always connect Bluetooth to the car. And all of the cars want to download all of my contact information into them. I never accept that, but sometimes you see contact data loaded up in a car that you rented.
Right.
It makes me think, what are you thinking? You don't own this car. There's a challenge.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, I think dangers lurk everywhere. I mean, my favorite example is the copier that you lease and ultimately return to your vendor without necessarily knowing that there's a hard drive in that copier that's recording every one of the documents that you've copied over the life of that lease. Only imagine the things that the secrets that can walk out of a company just by virtue of having leased a copy machine.
That's excellent. So treasury management systems are a relatively new service that's delivered over the cloud, really starting around 2000, 1999. They started becoming available over the cloud and then picked up the pace and became dominant. One of the challenges with, let's say, Treasury, for example, they have access to a number of banking systems, maybe a treasury management system. They might have FOBs for 20 banks. The treasury management system, someone leaves, they don't get removed from a signer list, or someone leaves, they don't get removed from the bank sign-on. I know one thing people are doing to help protect that more and more. I mean, now versus 4 years ago, now almost everyone seems to be moving towards single sign-on, use of SAML 2 to make sure that those, when someone leaves, they leave all the applications. Can you comment on that as just a concept of preventing that access through the use of IDs that may no longer be relevant?
Well, I think, really what I hear you talking about is, one of the important attack surfaces that everyone in a company should be mindful of. It's the job of the CISO, or the Chief Information Security Officer at a company to develop strategies to lower those kinds of risks. But network access controls is probably would be on my short list of half a dozen key attack surfaces that need to be managed. The move to single sign-on platforms, names like Okta, Ping, OneLogin, has been really helpful because it recognizes the way we access data today, increasingly from mobile devices, especially involving companies that have bring your own device policies. And so, we need to think about that perimeter now is extending out to a very extended area that, frankly, from a security standpoint, makes things very porous. So, making it easier for people to log in while still maintaining a high security posture is a big move forward. But I think beyond that, there are things we can do in the areas of password management, the way we provision devices and grant access and review that access from time to time. As you suggested, people come and go in organizations, and some of these credentials are sort of left open even after somebody might have left the organization. In some sense, a bit of a housekeeping issue, but frankly, I found that housekeeping is probably one of the most important things that a company can do to improve its level of security.
That's a great point. When you were talking, I was thinking of, I think it was a comic, or maybe I heard someone mentioning this. They were talking to one of those listening devices, and they said, "Hey, wiretap, turn up the heat or turn down the air conditioning." These devices listen for commands, and I think we've all heard of examples of an entire conversation was recorded and sent to someone, not intentionally, but because these devices were turned on and trying to help you out. And I think that's another point of exposure when we think about the principle of least privilege, only letting data or information be exposed to systems and people when it's required is crucial. And so, activating your phone for Cortana or for Siri or whatever, just to listen actively when you're at work discussing certain matters, I think you're saying that needs to be shut down.
Well, I wouldn't say shut down. It's just, understand, the risk of this new configuration of your network. Again, kind of moving from, the walled perimeter of the data center to a world where people can access your network through mobile phones. I think what you're talking about really introduces the concept of the whole Internet of Things revolution. Where we've got these devices that are operating out there. In many cases, aren't inventoried as part of a organized change management database within an organization, in which create endless possibilities for hackers to get into a system. Again, I don't think the answer from a security standpoint is to deny or prohibit the use of these kinds of devices. In fact, they have so many benefits that be foolhardy to do that. But you have to at the same time take into account the necessary controls and security technologies that can enable you to benefit from this IoT revolution.
Interesting. So if you let data go onto personal devices, you might require the ability to remote wipe them. That might be a countervailing factor. Make sure it's encrypted on the phone, and you can remote wipe it. That might be one standard, right?
Right. Well, that's a technology that's called mobile device management software. MobileIron would be a good example of that kind of vendor in that category. And I would today, I guess I would call that technology table stakes. If you're letting people use their own phone, or for that matter, corporate phones, you would certainly want to have that capability. I think what forward-looking companies are doing today is putting in network security technology that can trace the flow of data, well past that perimeter and out to all the endpoints. So it can not just erase data, but track that data and understand what that data is, and be able to screen out certain activities so that you can, for example, prevent a disgruntled employee from exfiltrating customer lists from their CRM system out to their mobile phone.
Yeah, out to the mobile phone or personal device. So it's monitoring the activity of number of
right. Yeah,
records.
I would call it extending your data loss prevention or your DLP policy to the cloud and to all your endpoints. And that technology exists. Gartner calls it cloud access security brokers. It's a body of technology that's been available for over 5 years now. Maybe 10% of the largest 1,000 companies in North America are using it. So we're somewhere in the second inning, I suppose. So a long way to go, in addressing a really fundamental issue in security today.
A lot of headroom for adoption there. The problem of personally identifiable information or secure data, it is everywhere. We talked about some of the endpoint management and some of the elements of protecting that data. What do we do about the problem of PII everywhere? Do we just encrypt it? Do we use some type of tokenization of it? How do we think about PII, especially considering how critical it is?
Yeah, that's a great question. Frankly, I started my firm just to address that kind of issue because I felt as if the one thing that companies weren't doing a good job of in this area is to have a comprehensive understanding of their data and information assets. Because only once you've achieved that can you both do a great job protecting the data, but also creating value from it. And so what you find today is that companies don't really know where their data is. And that's changing, but we're not getting there as quickly as we need to. For example, ask a company if they have a data map. You think, any CISO coming into the job would be able to walk into a room and get some visual schematic of all the data assets. I mean, after all, if you don't know where it is, how do you know how to protect it? So just creating an inventory of your data is a really terrific first step. To getting your arms around this, so that you know where your PII is, you know where your sensitive information is, and don't think for a minute that it's all within your direct control. It's one of the reasons why another one of those big attack surfaces beyond just network access controls would be understanding your third party and vendor relationships, because we operate in an ever more connected world. This, after all, was the basis of Target Corp's breach back in 2013, where they were hacked through an insecure HVAC vendor of theirs. Knowing where your data is, out in that outsourced community, and to ensure that group of vendors have good security is also part of solving this problem. We're not making the progress that we need to there either.
So is that data map just identifying here is where the data is? Every device internally, externally. Does it also look at access points to view it? Like the HVAC vendor you might have thought, that's going to be transported over there. Does it consider the access of that data, potential access?
Sure. No, I think maybe a better example than the HVAC vendor would be a law firm. About a year and a half ago, there was a big headline in the Wall Street Journal about Cravath, Swaine and Moore, and Weil, Gotshal, and other leading law firms, that had been breached. Now, since then, the level of security has improved dramatically, at firms like that. But, it underscores the importance of knowing, where your data is, and that a lot of the most sensitive information can actually be sitting outside of your own four walls.
Well, Craig, thank you for helping to expand on the concept of what is the second chapter of cloud and what that means for data, for security, and including this concept of a data map. I really appreciate your input here on the Treasury Update podcast.
My pleasure.
Thanks for joining.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. To receive Treasury insights and helpful resources, sign up for our newsletter at strategictreasurer.com.